Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Wise Tech for Wise Money. I'm Gary Wayne, founder of A1 Solutions International. We work with founders, leaders, and teams of financial services businesses to improve efficiency, scale intelligently, and grow smarter through the use of technology, systems, and operational strategy. Today's episode is titled Building Value in Complex Markets: Cannabis, Capital, and AI-driven innovation. Today's discussion is focused on how value is actually created in fragmented, highly regulated, and scientifically complex markets, and why most participants get it wrong. I'm joined by David W. Traylor, founder of Golden Eagle Partners, a specialist investment banking firm operating at the intersection of life sciences, cannabis, psychedelics, and capital markets. Hi, David. It's great to have you on.
Gary, thank you. Thank you for having me on, and thanks everybody for listening if you're out there on this amazing marble we call Earth.
How are you today?
I'm good. It's a little early, but I'm doing well, and certainly we can also weave in some information on Skunkworks Nature AI, because that's also a new AI thing that we have. But yeah, we can certainly start with
Yeah,
what
let's
we have done in the
let's
past.
start with your background and your history, your journey, and how you came to be where you are and doing what you're doing today.
Yeah, sure, Gary. I mean, we always like to say that we're lucky here at Golden Eagle Partners. The firm was founded in 2012, but the real story goes back to 89. And actually, we are just talking about, I went to school in Boulder, 2 undergrad degrees in biochem, molecular bio, and then spent a year ski bumming in St. Christoph, Austria, in the Arlberg region, which is one of the best things I've ever done. But came back and started working in biotech in Boulder, Colorado. So I have essentially 15 years of operational experience in leading biotech companies based in Boulder, Berlin, Germany, and Silicon Valley. Luckily, through some of that work, I was awarded 2 U.S. patents in bioprocessing, which turns out to be a big part of the cannabis sector. When I talk about cannabis, Gary, being a biochemist, we look at it in a molecular basis instead of, so cannabis is the genus of this amazing plant, which we'll get into. We look at it instead of, the nomenclature in this industry is all FUBAR too. It's pretty interesting, but we look at it, THC plus is some people call marijuana, and THC minus or tetrahydrocannabinol. THC stands for tetrahydrocannabinol. Many people know that's the delta 9 tetrahydrocannabinol. That's the molecule a lot of people know that has a lot of the psychoactive effects. So THC minus is hemp. So, excuse me, we work across the whole spectrum: industrial hemp, molecular hemp, marijuana, or THC plus. But did the biotech thing, got into investment banking in 2005 in San Francisco doing biotech deals, and then came back to Colorado, where I'm originally from, in 2009. And I was leading the life science group and investment bank here in Denver, Gary, and then founded Golden Eagle Partners to give myself more autonomy. And that was 2012, and that's when Colorado and Washington voters legalized adult use marijuana, or THC plus. And I was looking at it, Gary, I'm like, okay, cannabis is highly regulated. It's a biological supply chain. When you get down to it, it really is a drug. I'm like, that's biotech. So we are the first investment bank in the U.S. to jump into the cannabis sector. So we had our 12th anniversary last December. We had our 12th anniversary working in North America cannabis sectors in December. We had our 10th anniversary working internationally in January, and then we had our 5th anniversary working in psychedelics in December. So what we've been trying to do, Gary, with Golden Eagle Partners, and we can talk about Skunkworks Nature AI in a few minutes or later on, is trying to apply science to these amazing molecules to figure out what they do and don't do, because we have not applied enough stringent science to this amazing plant to really wean out the benefits.
How does that work from an investment point of view?
Well, that's a really good question. I mean, what's happened with the money, and that's what's been really tough, is that a lot of these financial institutions, many of my competitors, they always go on, and that's why I wanted to mention this 12 continuous years, 10 continuous years, because a lot of our competition, I won't name their names, these big firms, and this also gets to this technology piece we ought to talk about, is these big firms go in and out of these sectors. They start chasing, what they call marijuana or THC plus back in the day. They started chasing psychedelics. And the problem really that I face these days, Gary, is that you had a lot of these advisors advising companies and people on these investments, and they didn't know what they were talking about. And as a result, a lot of money was vaporized, as we call it, or just completely lost. There's a big company called Constellation Brands. It's one of the larger, Bev Alc companies in the world, and they put around $4 billion into one of the leading companies back a number of years ago, and that money's pretty much all gone. And I don't think they really generated much value out of that. So that's the one thing that we always talk about is one of our main things getting to the technology piece is of leveraging technology to really enhance our due diligence practices. Because again, too, my firm, we're registered reps here in the U.S. with FINRA, and if we do something wrong, we're in trouble. So
Sure.
that your point that you brought up is very important.
Well, so I'm a novice. I mean, I understand finance, I understand the markets generally, but I know nothing about cannabis. If I had $5 million laying around, and you said, "What about cannabis?" Why would I invest in cannabis? How do I actually see the return? What sort of yield does it enhance, and how does it actually work?
Yeah, no, there's a lot to unwrap there. Well, first of all, excuse me, before I answer that, excuse me, if you where you'd invested now, going back in the day when I first really jumped into cannabis, 2013, and then I was actually the chief business officer in late 2014 into 2015 of Cerna. Cerna was one of the first public companies in the cannabis sector. They made indoor climate control systems for indoor marijuana or THC plus operations. And so I was chief business officer, and we were a lightning rod for crap, if I can say that, Gary. And the reason being is that we were one of the first cannabis companies, and we were public, so we kind of like stood out. And we would have people come to us, giving us some options. And the amazing thing is they thought that they could, take advantage of us because they thought, well, if these guys work in a cannabis company, they're idiots. So the other thing I want to bring that up is that since you didn't have as many financial options then, and you still don't now, the cost of capital for cannabis, whether it's THC plus or THC minus, is much higher than other sectors. So if you're doing debt deals right now, we're looking at debt deals 15 to 25 maybe percent annual. Equity is pretty much non-existent right now. It's gone up in waves, and so that's been one of the really hardest things about working in this sector is the trying to find cheaper capital. The other thing that makes it so tough here in the United States, if you look at like the THC plus or marijuana sector, the amount of agencies it goes across is very unique and very, I don't think I've ever seen it, right? It's IRS, it's the FDA, the USDA, the DEA, the Treasury, all these things are involved. But getting back to your original question, if you had $5 million, there definitely are some very interesting companies that have been survivors. Definitely some interesting companies that have applied, both on the psychedelic and the cannabis side, applied science to find maybe potential solutions to certain issues. Like, for example, maybe the best thing to do if you had I always like to diversify too investments. One of the things and I have to be careful to, one of the things I have to be careful about is I can't provide too many recommendations on a format like this because I have to get a lot of that approved by my broker dealer.
Sure.
But I will say that there are a number of very interesting companies out there that are pushing the envelope. One of those is Avecho Biotech. They're one of our previous clients. They're based out of Melbourne. They're running a phase 3 clinical trial with cannabidiol CBD to try to treat insomnia. Don't know what that date is going to come out. They're still running the trial, but I think we are at the forefront. And also, there's a number of psychedelic companies, Gary, that are coming out with really, important data in clinical trials. And I think that's one of the things that's also been an advantage, getting back to this whole technology piece, like biochemistry and molecular biology, that's been a huge advantage for us, is to be able to really talk with people and with some of these leading science people on where we need to push these sectors, because we can only move them forward with really high fidelity data, right, and technology, and that's what we need to do.
When we spoke before earlier, when we first met, you described cannabis as a biological supply chain rather than an asset class. Can you explain what that means for the listeners?
Yeah, I mean, let's make it real simple. So everybody listening, I'm sure, knows about Pepsi or Coca-Cola or Coke. You have a brand like Coke, and it's a brand because of really two things. The way, and I'm no brand guy for sure, but a brand's built on consistent quality. When I buy a Coke, I'm buying a Coke because I know what it's going to taste like, and I enjoy that taste. With something with the biological supply chain is not so easy, because the consistency can be tough. And I know that because working in biotech back in the 90s, when we were making recombinant hemoglobin in fermenters with E. coli bacteria, we'd scale up the process from like 500 liters to 1,000 liters, and all of a sudden you'd have this protein impurity appear out of nowhere, and we couldn't have it in the final preparation, especially when we're making material for clinical trials. So by that experience, I learned that biological supply chains are inherently unstable. If you're using like a plant or a bacteria to make a product, unlike, using photolithography and wafers, glass wafers to make integrated circuits, that's different. So biological supply chains are inherently unstable, and so that makes it tough to make a consistent quality. For example, there's a guy, Jeff Raber, who's a PhD chemist who I've known well. If you take two extraction systems with the same biomass, cannabis biomass, to input into the same system and do it 2-3 different times, you will sometimes get different consistencies of molecules coming out of the final product. So natural molecules aren't so easy to deal with.
You told me again that cannabis industry, as you use it and work in it, is a very tough business. I remember when cannabis first started to become legal, and there was like a huge boom. So what happened between cannabis being so current and a huge boom to what's made it so difficult now?
Well, I think that gets back to the money piece that you talked about, and a lot of it is mismanagement. There were quite a few senior management teams in these companies, and they mismanaged their money. And the other, one of the biggest problems is a simple thing that I mentioned and got quoted in Bloomberg back in 2020, right before the pandemic hit, is that there's been too much arrogance and too little humility in this industry. People came in and thought, oh, well, it's only weed, right? And it turns out this plant is very tough. It's easier to grow weed, but it's very hard to grow really, really good cannabis. And so it's a number of factors, but one of the biggest is the fact that, you have these people come in, and it's like, and that happens a lot. I saw that happen quite a bit, excuse me, in Silicon Valley when I was there in the 90s, where you had some people think, oh, I'm going to come in and make a bunch of money. And it's to do things right and to make a good money in an honest living and provide real value to customers. It's not so easy.
You talk about, there's obviously a lot of regulation, capital markets, and operational execution combined to make it difficult. You also mentioned to me a minute ago when I said, what would I do with $5 million? You said, well, you can't make recommendations, etc., because you have to get everything passed by your broker-dealer, which I understand in the marketplace. Our broker-dealers, and I'm not talking about your particular one, you work in a very specialised, highly complicated arena. Do broker-dealers have the expertise to make those calls for regulatory purposes, generally?
Yeah, if they're good, right? I mean, One of the things, that's a good question, and I need to weave all this things into to this answer too, because one of the things too I just should have mentioned, there's a whole lot of things that make cannabis tough, whether it's the THC plus or the THC minus. I mean, there's a lot of stigma, there's a lot of misinformation. It's the toughest industry, especially the regulated THC plus side. Toughest industry in the world, easy. For example, we had all these hemp beverages last year, really interesting things going on. And alcohol didn't really like that. The alcohol is competing with alcohol. Alcohol consumption's going down in the U.S. And so they had the continuing resolution, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Mitch McConnell throws this hemp ban essentially to ban most hemp molecules out of nowhere, puts it into the continuing resolution out of nowhere. There's always headwinds. With Germany was essentially improving and having some real good achievements in medical cannabis, medical THC plus, and they had the SPD party, and they ended up losing. The CDU came in last year, and CDUs come in. They're conservative. They've been looking to put curbs on the German industry. I think this week they're going to have a number of things fall out of that. So again, it's always a moving target. It's like pushing a boulder up a hill, but I think that's one of the things why on this regulated side, like the SEC and the FINRA, that we've always been at the forefront of is that we've realized that, excuse me, Gary, and this goes back to when I was at CERNA, that public company, we realized that we had to be above and beyond and do things more effectively and cleaner than any other company around in the world because we knew we had a target on our back. Because we knew that, we at some point, FINRA is going to come in and say, oh, you guys work in cannabis? And that happened a year and a half ago. Our broker dealer gets audited like all broker dealers, to answer your question, like every 5, 6, 7, 8 years. And the FINRA came in to audit our broker dealer, and guess what? They say, oh, hey, Matt Doherty and David Traylor, Golden Eagle Partners, they work in cannabis. We want to talk to those guys. We both had to talk to a FINRA investigator for a half an hour, and we came out with flying colors because, again, we realized that, working with people's money, there's a reason why you have to take a test, and there's a reason why there's the Act of 1933, the SEC, and the Act of 1934. Because of all the stuff that happened in the 20s and the fact that, the CNBC still has a show, American Greed, right? There's still people getting fleeced with money, and it happened a lot with cannabis. And one of the putting this all on a tidy bow, the problem with the psychedelic and the cannabis sectors and why there's been a lot of money lost is they're very unique. And people see the green opportunity and they jump in. And they don't understand it. And when you don't understand stuff, that's why you talk to Warren Buffett, and where he says, invest in what you know, right? And that is and actually getting that together, that's the what Golden Eagle Partners does. We go around the world trying to find really smart capital for really smart companies. And in these sectors, it's not easy.
You must obviously spend a huge amount of time creating content and educational material to educate people, because obviously not many people do understand cannabis and the arena you're in.
Actually, this is a great segue. That's not actually what we spend a lot of time on. What we do
Right.
spend a lot of time on, this is a nice segue into technology and how we apply technology to our practice, because we're not a large firm. There's only two of us, but we've been leveraging technology for a long time. One of the biggest things we spend a lot of time on is LinkedIn. So we have an AI platform that combines with LinkedIn, and what we do is and I was spending some time last night. We can reach out on LinkedIn. Excuse me. And since we're so active on LinkedIn, most of the people we reach out to are secondary connections to us. And the whole reason why we are so fanatical about LinkedIn is that we believe there's two things that we can have as advantages for us. So, for example, if we're an investment bank, and our hope is that at some point, if Goldman Sachs or JP Morgan, one of these big banks, wants to actually come in and be successful in cannabis and psychedelics and these plant natural compounds, that they realize that they can't reinvent what we've done. So we base our business on two things: expertise. So I have expertise, again, that goes back to 1989, my first biotech job. That's a lot of years. that they cannot replicate. And we also have a Rolodex or relationships around the world that they can't replicate either. We have connections, and you name a company, we probably have connections into it. So what we do, Gary, is use LinkedIn and reach out, and we have certain prompts that we come up with depending on the person and their background, and say, hey, we should connect because we have a high quality of set of connections, and we've been doing this for so long with natural compounds, whatever. They accept our invite, and then we put their information into an AI technology, get their address, cell phones, etc., put it into our Outlook, which ports into our CRM, and guess what? We now have, so if somebody calls me up and I see the phone, if I don't know the phone number on WhatsApp or on my phone, I don't answer it. But anybody who's I know that's part of our business, they're in my phone.
When you obviously your firm specialises in cannabis. Do you deal in any other products? I mean, I understand you've done M&A, joint ventures, and structured deals. Is that all around cannabis, or is that on a wider platform?
No, I mean, it's all specifically in natural compounds, and that's actually a good segue too to pull in Skunkworks Nature AI, because you've been asking about capital and the access to capital, and it's really been tough. And with both sectors, and the main reason is, we had a lot of money put in, and it wasn't well invested, and the companies weren't well run. And a lot of these like venture firms that had put money in to cannabis, a lot of the companies never went public, or the public companies still have low valuations, so they haven't been able to exit to prove that, hey, we can invest money and have another fundraise. And so my partner, Matt Doherty, were like, okay, over the last 3 or 4 years, who has money? Well, it turns out a lot of the big companies have money, whether they're big, cosmetic companies or chemical companies or beverage companies or bev alc. Certainly tobacco's already jumped into cannabis. But there's a lot of companies on the outside, energy drink companies. There's a lot of companies, Gary, on the outside looking in that say, hey, this is interesting. The one thing that's fascinating is they really won't admit it publicly because of all the stigma and, their strategies, etc. And so last year we came with the idea to leverage our Rolodex and our expertise that we have built up, not only leverage it for Golden Eagle Partners, but start a new firm called Skunkworks Nature AI. And the idea, it's a reference to the Lockheed plant in Palmdale, California, Skunkworks, right? The advanced technology program at Lockheed that developed some of the most innovative airframes in the history of mankind, right? The SR-71, the 117 Nighthawk stealth fighter. And as a result of that plant, Skunkworks has become synonymous with secret innovation. So that's the idea. Skunkworks Nature is to go out to these companies, big and small, and leverage our knowledge or the knowledge we have connected to around the world to say, okay, you guys can waste a lot of time and money to try to find out how to monetize and strategize around all these natural compounds. Or you can come to us, and if we don't have the answer, we can go to a botanist, a chemist, a medical doctor, you name it, a regulatory person, a government person, to figure out the answers. Like, take, for example, alkaloids. Alkaloids, forget cannabinoids. Alkaloids are fascinating. Caffeine and nicotine, natural compounds, have made more money in mankind's history. Maybe sucrose, right? Cocaine's an alkaloid. Ibogaine an alkaloid, and psilocybin is an alkaloid. So you have these amazing natural molecules that we haven't found out what they do or don't do for a given disease or indication or wellness state. And we need to leverage technology to find those solutions.
How much, as a biochemist, how much actual scientific work do you do as part of what you do?
Well, that's a great question, because that's a good way to bring up AI. So that's one of the things that we've been doing that's really been helpful, saving time. So I just was given a paper by a potential client yesterday on a really arcane technology called microRNA, and then we also, excuse me, from your neck of the woods, there's a guy, David Nutt, who's a famous scientist in psychedelics in your neck of the woods in England. And one of the guys who did work with him, Carhart Harris, Dr. Carhart Harris, I saw speak at a conference last year. Was really, really smart guy. He's at UCS, University of California, San Francisco, which is a very well-respected scientific institution. And he wrote a paper, not on microRNA, but another kind of really arcane psychedelic paper, excuse me, about your brain and entropy and psychedelics. And instead of trying to wade through that paper or this paper on microRNA for about an hour, 2 hours, because papers like that are very dense, they take concentration, or you can just plug that into AI and have it summarized. It's amazing. I mean, and that's one of the things that's an advantage to us, Gary, and was when I was working in biotech, is that if we come across a science that's being applied to psychedelics or cannabis in some manner or form, we can figure out very quickly, because that's one of the big advantages. You go to an investment bank that has a cannabis group, another investment bank that has a cannabis group, and a biotech group. You know, the cannabis deal comes into the cannabis company, the cannabis part of the firm, and if it's a scientific thing, they don't understand it, so they kick it over to the biotech side, and the biotech guys don't know cannabis, but they spend 5 minutes looking and say, hey, this is biotech, kick it back over. We can do both equally well, so we're a very unique animal.
So when you come to do a deal, what is the perfect deal structure and situation you need to get a deal done today, especially, in this crazy market we live in?
Well, yeah, that's a great question, because one thing I learned back at CERN, again, that public company, is that, the potential options you have for capital or finding capital, whether it's debt, equity, or whatever, for a cannabis company, whether you're THC plus or THC minus, is much smaller than a typical, like, look at what's going on with AI and AI investment, right? I mean, and I saw that when I was in Silicon Valley in the late 90s, right? You saw the dot-com boom and the dot-com bust. Excuse me. And with cannabis, you have less options. And when you have less options, the cost of capital tends to be higher. But also that puts pressure too on us as doing our job. But that's what we do. I mean, the best thing we can do is provide options for our clients. And also, as you mentioned, the structure. What we learned back at CERN, and we've known for over 10 years, Gary, if you're a cannabis company or psychedelics company, you don't go to the market with a given valuation, and you don't go to the market with a given structure. What you need to do is you need to have flexibility, because, if you go to the market with a given structure for a cannabis company, all of a sudden you're taking that small, potential pool of investors or options and making it smaller, because you're specifically targeting a given structure. And that's what we've been saying forever, is you want to go to the market and have be very flexible in the structure, so you can get a deal done. But getting deals done is not so easy.
Have you ever thought using SPACs or anything like that?
Yeah, no, I mean, we've never done a SPAC deal, although we did have a client a couple of years ago that was looking at going public options and what they were. And the interesting thing that's interesting you bring that up in that structure is, one of the things we like to do for our clients is let them figure out. We don't want to, I come from science, I don't want to bias, my clients. If they ask our opinion and they really want it, we'll certainly tell them. But we ran a process for a company that was looking to go public, and we essentially ran a really nice open process to say, okay, we even had them talk to a SPAC. Now, our thought is, and there's some really interesting writings out there if somebody's interested in SPACs, good and bad. I have some really interesting papers written. I think, excuse me, if you really want to go, the SPACs have a lot of baggage, frankly. There's a lot of dilution that goes with them. They're really made to make money for the advisor and make money for the investors.
I understood SPACs were a big thing going back about probably 10 years. And then they went quiet. But I've been talking to quite a few investment banks and fund managers and family offices, etc., and SPACs. The only reason I bring it up is because SPACs seems to be coming back as a little bit more in vogue. More people are talking about using it for accumulating funds to achieve their end goal as a structure. So that's why I actually brought it up.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it is. I'd have to look at the data. I know that during the pandemic, 2019, 2020, 2021, it continued to go up. I think those numbers fell way off the last few years, and maybe it's coming back. But again, Gary, the problem, that's why you have strict regulations in financial, is there are a lot of people out there that really don't care about what the end result is for their client or, excuse me, for other. I mean, you saw that a lot with the CDOs and CMOs, collateralized debt obligations, and et cetera, that happened in 2008, 2009, that you had these advisors, these investment bankers, these financial professionals that saw that it was a piece of junk, and but they are like, it's not my grenade. I'll pass it on to the other guy. And again, if you really look at the structures on going public, companies are better served to go public via direct listing than they are a SPAC. SPACs are there to make money for. That's why, yeah. I mean, some are good, but just like any transaction. Reverse mergers, we do quite a bit. We've done quite a bit in the past with the reverse mergers. A lot of those are poor transactions. So like SPACs, like reverse mergers, if they're done really well, they're good transactions, but most are not done really well. So
You work on a global basis. You mentioned Germany, other countries. You've built obviously a great presence, and there's only, you're a very small operation in people numbers. How have you managed to expand and sort of get such a good global profile with obviously limited capacity from a manpower point of view?
yeah. Well, one of the things we've been lucky about, Gary, and it's a good question, is the fact that we knew that cannabis, both the hemp or the THC minus side and the marijuana, the THC plus side, were new industries, right? And so if you get in ground floor to new industry, and if you kind of are able to grow with it, right? Like for example, we were also very selective. We got a deal done in 2019. And we've been doing international, as I mentioned, for just for over 3 years, almost 4 years at that point. And we're like, well, shit. Somebody came and said, hey, we're doing some events in Davos during the World Economic Forum. And we're like, well, yeah, I mean, we ought to put up or shut up if we're going to be international. So we went over there and sponsored. We're the only group to sponsor both events. What was really cool is I got quoted in Rolling Stone for that event. They call it a weed grows in Davos was the article. But why I bring that up is that we do that. I can still reference that from way back when. It was right before the pandemic hit. And so we've been able to grow. We've been able to we've talked over 45 times. Certainly around the U.S. on cannabis and psychedelics, but also in Dubai in 2018. We, as I mentioned, went to Davos. We've been in Berlin a couple of times, Frankfurt a couple of times, Grand Cayman. But then you also weave in this technology component, right? So the cool thing is you go out, like for example, we went to, Berlin for our second event. I think it was 2023. And when we go into an event, and I did this last week, I spoke at a hemp event. We don't know everybody in the world, Gary. Nobody does. But what we did do is reach out to Berlin and said, okay, we don't know you. We reached out on LinkedIn and said, hey, we've never connected, but I'm going to be in Berlin next week. We ought to find some time. And we had 80 meetings in 4 days, 80 meetings or conversations in Berlin that year.
Well, that's amazing.
4 days. And then
That's
you follow
amazing.
up. And then Gary, and then you layer back in technology and say, okay, you get their email or whatever, put it into your CRM. And that gets to this point too. If you look at investment banking firms, we've been talking about this for a couple of years. That when I was my first investment banking job, there's 20 people in the group or 30 people in the entire investment banking firm with a lot of analysts and stuff to do a lot of data generation. There's no way you're going to have investment banking groups that large, right? With AI and the technology, you're going to. But this also gets to the point that you and I want to bring up. There's AI is going to, take away some jobs or, change, some jobs are going to go away, but some jobs are going to appear. Some are going to disappear, but some are going to appear. I have a daughter, as you and I were talking about, who's still in college. And it's like, if you can come out of college and know how to apply this technology, you're going to be a big advantage, because it's not going to just, kill all jobs. There are going to be jobs that will appear with AI.
Without a doubt, I think the key is understanding that AI goes beyond ChatGDP and using Claude and these chat boxes as Google on steroids. I mean, AI to me, I implement it for people. Is a systemized process. And it cuts down manual processes and increases marketing and visibility. And what it does more than anything, it gives you time and it gives you coverage, which is how you're able to do your global work. Tell me, when it comes to globalization, how important are relationships versus the systems you use?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, that's one of the things with I think that's been interesting about the Zoom age, or the Zoom era, right? Is that all of a sudden, and it was kind of interesting how it was so coincidental with the pandemic. And I don't know when Zoom, the company, actually was founded, and when the technology really, but certainly with what happened in the pandemic. And that's one thing we did with during when the pandemic hit. Excuse me, as I've been mentioning, right? We've been in Dubai in 2018, had a family office event, and we went to Davos. And all of a sudden, you're not able to travel for a year and a half, 2 years, because of the pandemic. So we were using databases, Zoom, to at least get connected with people. Now, Zoom, it's not like a face to face. But I mean, the other thing is too is that time is money. So if there's a way to leverage technology and you can essentially, get connected with somebody like what you're talking about over the last week, we've either met on Zoom or met in face to face with somebody from Pakistan, somebody from Botswana, somebody from Brazil, somebody from Sweden, obviously here in the U.S. It's amazing, right? And we are what you and I mentioned. We are going global. We need to have smarter leaders realize that this is a global world, and the fact that if you're gonna go ahead and jump in and start something, you ought to figure out what the ramifications are. And this gets back to Carhart Harris's paper on entropy, right? Entropy is a fascinating measurement of chaos and disorder and energy states. That's one of the things that we as science, I think, also helps us realize that if we can kind of help organize a lot of this chaos with technology, whether it's AI, I mean, for example, our CRM, Gary, is a lifesaver. I mean, people don't realize that investment banking is kind of a weird kind of, we're nothing more than glorified salespeople to give somebody out there a real idea of what investment banking is all about. That's what it is. It's sales. So first of all, we need to sell potential clients on our firm and say, hey, we could help you get a transaction done or whatever you need. Once they hire us, then they go into another set, which is our clients, and then we need to go out and sell our clients for on an M&A or an equity deal or debt deal. And that complexity needs a CRM, right? Because you have all these opportunities, and once you have a client, then all of a sudden we're like going out to 40 or 50 companies or people for one client. And if you have 4 or 5 clients, right, you have 300 contacts you have to organize.
Yeah, of course.
Gets very complex.
Do you find any bottlenecks within the systems you use?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's a lot of times there's a bottleneck just on one of the biggest bottlenecks is, and this is where AI can probably help in, is one of the biggest bottlenecks is just trying to transpose all this information we establish. I mean, that's one of the things is there's increasing returns to scale, and that's why I get back to this relationship and this database of people we have, right? Once we have that, it's a competitive advantage that people would be really hard to knock off. And that's one reason why we spend so much time on LinkedIn and relationships and AI. And I do it every week. And it's a huge advantage to be able, and that's really one of our big bottlenecks is, okay, there's, for example, this is really an interesting example. There was a future food tech conference recently that we hadn't heard about. We definitely want to go next year. Very interesting conference with a lot of these big companies, Cargill, Microsoft had a guy there. And a lot of these companies are looking, at the future of food technology and how to be able to feed the world better with more natural things, right? We're going to more natural. And we reached out to 115 people on LinkedIn, and we had over a 50% hit rate on LinkedIn. Now, we used to have 20-30%, which is nice. Now we're getting 40-50% hit rate. The good news is that that's very cool. The bad news is now we have to put all those contacts into our CRM and our Outlook. There's a
Sure.
bottleneck right there, right? So,
What about yeah, I mean, we look at bottlenecks and pain points all the time. Obviously, there's so many different systems out there that you can put together to solve them, but without understanding what those problems are, there's no one tool that does it. When we talk about cannabis going forward in the future, um, how do you see the future mapping out? Do psychedelics follow a similar trajectory or evolve differently? How do you see regulation evolving globally? How do you see the market actually, maturing?
God, uh, first, one thing before I answer that, you brought up an interesting thing that being a science guy, I like to, bottleneck I call rate limiting step, right? That's kind of the chemist way of looking at it. And that's one thing that it's been interesting using. I used to be a project manager. So that's the other thing that we kind of do that's pretty unique is that we can put something into Microsoft Project. And as you know, critical path and everything, you can pretty easily find out, okay, what is the rate limiting step? What is the bottleneck? And so that is very important to us is to do that analysis. But the one thing that we say, cannabis, the most predictable thing about cannabis, is its unpredictability. So we have been lucky to be able to predict some of the things that went on with the CBD implosion and a lot of things with the regulated THC plus implosion. With a lot of these big companies that didn't do so well. I think really a lot of this depends on what happens with regulations. For example, again, the thing that's tough about this industry is capital doesn't like uncertainty. I mean, we're kind of seeing that on the global stage right now with the fact that
Sure.
the Strait of Hormuz is closed, which provides this. This shock is going to be significant. I mean, that's one thing. If you don't know about complexity theory, you should read about it, or people out there should read about it, because that's what happened with the pandemic. You have all these systems that are moving naturally, and all of a sudden you have this really external shock to a system.
Do you think this is as big a shock as the pandemic?
Oh yeah, no doubt about it. I mean that energy are and there's also helium. People aren't even talking about helium as a big part of making a lot of these circuits, etc., and electronics. And the world runs on oil. And the airlines, the ramifications go across the economy pretty readily. I mean, I saw last week, I think it was the U.S. Postal Service put on a additional energy charge, for what's going on. Now, I'm no expert in global economies, but if you look at complexity theory, that's what happened with the pandemic. Is that you had all of a sudden everybody just stop for 3 or 4 months or whatever, and to get things back up, and the fact that you had the Fed saying, "Oh, inflation's transitory." It's like, no, it's not transitory. It's going to be, if you look at complexity theory, when you have a shock like this, it doesn't. It's not like, oh, if the Strait of Hormuz opened tomorrow, it's not like everything would get back to normal the next day. That's a fallacy.
No, that's true, and I don't see that happening anytime soon. But the other thing that I think that this does, it makes the world smaller.
Yep. Yeah.
People, communication shuts down, people can't talk to each other. I mean, we've already had a step back from free trade, but this is
Yeah.
actually going to make it even more complex.
Yeah, but I mean, getting back to technology, I mean, this is great that, you and I have recently met and we're doing this right now. We're, getting some information out. I mean, we are in the information age. And, as Matt and I always say at Golden Eagle Partners or Skunkworks Nature, we don't have all the answers. We know a lot of smart people that may have the answers. And that gets back to this whole thing about arrogance versus humility. Certainly, I'm pretty opinionated, but we also are very careful about what we talk about. But we also want to bring to bear a lot of what we've learned in the past, like you and I were talking before. Also, there's a lot to be learned from other people from other parts of the world. If you're
Definitely.
going and running a business or running a country based on what you know is just what you've born and raised just in your country. I mean, we are a global, planet. We need to work together to make sure that we can keep this whole planet, safe and clean, and for your children, your children's children, and mine too. And I think that gets back to your original question about where this is going. I think the really thing that's cool about this, like for example, ibogaine, right? Ibogaine has had some really amazing treatments, or ayahuasca. There's a guy, Danny Carcillo, I've gotten to know, who's played for the Chicago Blackhawks, and he won a couple of cups with the Blackhawks, and he was a tough player, and he had, he wasn't doing so well with his head and et cetera, and he went down. South America had an ayahuasca treatment, and it's on the internet. You can look it up, and his wife's like, he's back to normal. So, we're doing a lot of this stuff now, right? We're sending guys back into the battle. You're seeing this in Ukraine, for God's sake. That, if you look back on World War One, you're English, there's a
Sure.
bunch of guys that came back, doughboys that came back from WW1 with shell shock. Well, now they call it PTSD.
Yeah,
And there
that's
are
correct.
ways to, that's the thing. These natural compounds are amazing. Now, they're not amazing for every indication or every disease state, and that's why we need to apply more science and technology to figure out, what can we apply these to, because some of the stuff we've seen with psilocybin, right, or MDMA, ecstasy, LSD. LSD's had some really interesting things. The one thing I'll bring up real quick that's really interesting about the psychedelics that's tough is that it's tough to run randomized controlled trials, clinical trials with psychedelics, because people pretty much know if they're on the, if we're microdosing and there's no psychedelic or psychoactive effect to the compound, well, that's a different story. But if you're taking these and getting a psychedelic effect to apply a therapeutic benefit, then it's hard to have a randomized trial because the enrollee knows if they're on the medicine or not, right?
There's
So
one thing I wanted to ask you before we start to wrap up. CBD, people taking it like vitamins, you can buy it off a shelf. I actually take it. Does it do you any good?
absolutely. Well, I mean, again, so every person has a different genetic makeup, right? And people metabolize different molecules differently. I mean, that's why you have with some medicines now where you have personalized medicine to kind of look at a person's genetic makeup. There's actually a guy I talked to his sister died because they gave her chemotherapeutic to treat her cancer, and they didn't do enough genetic workup to realize that she couldn't metabolize that drug, and as a result, pretty much the chemotherapeutic killed her. Now, yes, CBD definitely works for some people. And again, I mentioned that company, Avecho Biotech. They are working using cannabidiol with their proprietary drug delivery technology to try to treat sleep. And there's no doubt that CBD works on sleep, CBN works on sleep for some people. I don't think it probably works across the entire spectrum. But cannabinol, CBN, is known to be work for sleep. But yeah, CBD, the problem with CBD, again, Gary, and this is kind of the problem with the cannabis and psychedelic sectors, is with the CBD back here in the States in the 2018, 2019, there wasn't enough hurdles to jump through to get products on the market. And as a result, There's a lot of noise on the market. There are a lot of crappy products. There are a lot of products that were on the market that really didn't probably have any CBD, and you have somebody take it, and it's like, oh, this shit doesn't work. They're one and done, right?
I mean, my daughter said, we were talking about CBD, and she said, "Oh, Dad, you take it." And she said that's probably why you're more chilled and less stressed. And when I
Yeah,
look back, at stressful issues, I am generally, don't get me wrong, I still get stressed, and you
yeah,
know,
yeah.
but compared to the old days, I am a lot more relaxed.
Well, the other thing too, and you can look this up, Gary. They have quite a bit of clinical data, real data, that shows that CBD and THC, delta 9 THC together, are synergistic with pain. So if you're taking pain, and I still play lacrosse, and when I'm done with the game, I'm 61. I get bumps and bruises. I take a CBD THC gummy. It definitely helps out. So yeah, but it depends on the person too, and that's why we need to apply more science to figure out, okay, if you have this genetic makeup, what natural molecule is really going to work for you.
Okay, so just moving on, before we finish up, it's been a really good call. I'd like to know if you had a magic wand, you know, in the cannabis and psychedelic sectors, capital markets, and your own business, what would you change?
Oh man, that's a good one. Actually, I think if I'm not interested in usually imposing my belief systems or anything on anybody else. I think probably if I had a magic wand, I'd probably improve and increase our capabilities. I mean, really, if I, had like a wish, probably, and maybe we might even do this, is to go out and raise money for Skunkworks Nature AI, to essentially give that a boost too, because I think we see with what we've seen, like that Future Food Tech Conference and some of the outreach we've had, that, we're quickly moving past this cannabis and psychedelics part to the point that it's just about natural compounds. And that's, I think, what I'd like to do is have the more probably capital and more freedom and more access to go around the world to figure out, because these natural compounds are one thing that's really interesting data that I saw in a paper, Gary, that I hadn't thought about, is these guys did analysis of natural compounds in clinical trials versus like synthetic compounds biotech companies or pharma companies make. By and large, the toxicity profiles, the phase 1 data on natural compounds was much higher than, the toxicity was lower. The success on a toxicity measurement was much higher than synthetic compounds. And it kind of goes without saying, right? These are natural compounds, so typically they're less toxic, and they can do some really interesting things. So yeah, if I had a magic wand, that would probably be trying to work more on the Skunkworks Nature AI side and push that out to the world, and probably travel more and get to, like, for example, there's some cool stuff going on in Africa, right? And that continent needs more help, and certainly in the Caribbean too. We're hopefully using this plant to generate economic and medical and wellness and societal benefits for countries and communities around the world. That's really what we're trying to do.
Thank you, David. Well, I've got to say, this has been probably one of the most complex podcasts I've had.
Yeah.
I have learned a lot, but it's, obviously your level of understanding and the depth of which you talk about it is something, I'd have to read up a lot to actually understand it in more detail.
Well,
But
the
I
other
think
thing,
these
Gary.
are very interesting subjects, and I think, personally, if you could, from an investor point of view, I think if we can simplify the understanding of it, more to the general public, I think more people will be buyers, because I do think this is something that's going to expand and really grow to a great degree. So I think you've got to do more podcasts like this and more educating, for the general investor to get involved, and I think they will
Oh,
get involved.
absolutely. And Gary, I've really enjoyed it, and maybe we can always do it again, and we definitely should stay in touch because I think that's kind of what we've been trying to do. There's so much misinformation, and like for example, the stigmas, right? I mean, the stigma on psychedelics is real,
Yeah,
and everybody is like, "Oh my God," and it turns out that if you really look at the data, and same with, I still know a lot of people that won't, that work in cannabis is like, well, I've never used it. It's like, okay, well, that's not my fault. I mean, you don't have to use something, get really high as a kite to have it may have a benefit. I mean, that's what we're seeing with a lot of these hemp beverages that people don't need to come home and have 3 or 4 glasses of wine and all the calories. They can come home and have one of these hemp beverages and have a really nice, relaxing evening without using alcohol. Because
I'd like to try one of
alcohol is
those.
a toxin.
So look, you said stay in touch. We'll book a follow up when we come off the line. But before we close down the podcast, where can people get hold of you? Where can they find out more about your company and what the future holds, etc.?
Yeah, thanks, Gary. No, I enjoyed it. Thanks everybody for listening. If you're still out there, but yeah, LinkedIn, David Traylor on LinkedIn, but certainly Golden Eagle Partners. We have a website. We actually just put up a website. To be frank, we need to optimize it for Skunkworks Nature AI. But yeah, one of those places. Most of my contact information's out there. I mean, we have to be available to talk with people, and always interested to talk to people, especially if you're somebody that's a young person trying to figure out finance. These days, it's not easy. Always willing to talk to people, in school and stuff. We do have a lot of people that put in stuff for internships. And so, yeah, I have 2 daughters, as you do too, and I know it's not easy out there. So anything I can do to help anybody, whether it's directly related to making money or not, is all right.
Thank you, David. Well,
Thanks,
I'm
Gary.
Gary Wayne. This is Wise Tech for Wise Money. We'll be along with another episode in the next few days. But David, it's been amazing. I've really enjoyed this and I've learned a lot. And I
Thank you,
think
Gary.
I might look to invest in cannabis going forward.
Yeah,
Anyway,
no, thanks, Gary. We'll
thank
stay
you
in
once
touch.
again.
Yeah, thanks for your time. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.